for the superintendent on her report? Seeing none, we'll continue on. Next up is item 5, Utah Public Education Correlation Participation. That's you, Superintendent.
We have been, excuse me, attending the Utah Public Education Coalition meeting as guests, and those of you that have been on the board a while might remember the discussion that we had with prior board in terms of our membership. And the discussion at that time was that as elected officials, that there was a feeling that as part of that coalition that we shouldn't be participating in any kind of vote or recommendations, and there were some other concerns expressed by the board at that time. So now the coalition is asking once again for perhaps a more formal participation. Again, we're there. We serve there as guests. We always have representation. The coalition is always very good to us as partners in having us report, make presentations, just be part of the conversation. But I'm bringing to you the possibility to see if you want to revisit being more formal partners. I think currently we've been written out, seems too punitive, but we're not formally in the bylaws as an official partner any longer. Those were changed. So the coalition would write us back into the bylaws should you choose as a board to be formally a part of that. If not, then we'll continue participating as we have done, which is serving in more of a guest capacity.
Board Member Cannon.
I'd like to make a motion that the Utah State Board of Education once again become a partner in the Utah Education Coalition.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second.
To join go back to Utah.
Okay, any further discussion?
May I just speak to that?
You can speak to the motion.
Yeah,
You get to be first.
one of the first assignments I had as a board member was to serve as the board representative on the Utah Public Education Coalition, and I found it incredibly helpful because you go and you meet with all other people who have a stake in public education, and they particularly meet, I guess, around legislative sessions and see if there are places they can come together. But it's certainly not necessary that everybody has the same idea about something. And, you know, some groups are together on one issue and others aren't, and that type of thing. But I think being part of the discussion with all of these groups that have an interest in education in the state of Utah really benefits us to be part of that conversation. So I'd love to see us be an active participant.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
So just some logistical questions. So Board Member Cannon pointed out that during that legislative time, we have the opportunity to participate in that collective voice. So if a board representative goes and they vote no on a particular issue, and the coalition now, having the State Board of Education as a member, goes forward through the legislative session with a topic that we as a board don't agree with, how does that play out where we basically say, you know, this particular topic is not something that the Board of Education agrees with, yet our name is tied to a coalition, kind of almost like a lobbying effort on a particular topic. So that's one question. And then also we have talked at length about our role in how best to have our voice heard during that legislative session, being specific on certain topics and that ability to really converse and move forward with the topic. And so I guess I worry that this particular conversation, I agree that the coalition voice and having those discussions is important feedback and everybody in the whole community having these conversations. But this particular group, they take votes and they create action based on these votes, the action that they are taking as a commission. And so I guess the question is how would that conflict with action that may be taken by the board in a different direction? And so anyways, I know I'm rambling on, but I'm concerned about that conflict that may exist over time.
Okay. Superintendent, would you like to speak to that first question and then their concern?
Yeah, so there are actually two different coalitions. The first is the one that we're talking about today is the Utah Public Education Coalition. So that's a group that consists of the Principals Association, UEA is at the table, the Superintendent's Association, PTA, and it's a group that meets monthly, and we clarify bills, for example. We talk about issues. Rarely, I can't think of a time, I'm sure that votes have been taken, but it's generally not a group that votes. The JLC, the Joint Legislative Council, is that what the L stands for? Leadership Legislative Committee. And so JLC is actually the group that is more active in the legislative process, and they are the ones that take votes. And we are not a part of that group in terms of officially registering as a voting member. We visit with them, we serve as guests, but we do not participate in votes. So they're kind of two, although they overlap, those are two very different groups. The JLC is made up of local school board members, the Business Administrators Association, and Superintendents Association. So the PUPEC is a different group.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
And in response to your question, Brittany, I watched this group work, and one of the beauties of it is that the coalition, as I think the superintendent said, doesn't take positions on everything, but it also does not take positions on everything. It takes positions on some things, but it doesn't take a position unless every member agrees.
Yeah, that's
And which I think is a really beautiful consensus model. And I'm just a person, as I kind of think I've demonstrated, that I think if you are going to be part of a group, you ought to commit to the group. And I don't, in 20 plus years of observing their work, I never saw, I saw the groups differ. Sometimes the Superintendent's Association couldn't agree with the State Board of Education, and they were able to pursue their different objectives civilly, respectfully, learn something from each other, often meet common ground, often find common ground. And I think it is I think we benefit so much for that group. I hate just being tangentially involved, and it doesn't disadvantage us, I don't believe, in any way.
Okay. Board Member Wright.
This might come across arrogant, but I think this needs to be said. We are the sovereign. We are the Genesis. We were created by the Constitution, and we supervise public education. And so I like what Board Member Cummins said, and I'm even more concerned about the opposite. What if a board member is on this and they vote in favor of something? Does that imply that the state board has endorsed it? And do people use it that way? And does it indirectly do it? And I don't, it's too confusing. I do think it's okay to have someone there in an observational role, but unless this board votes to take a position or on an issue, I don't like an individual board member in some sort of coalition voting in favor. I would think any board member here should attend their meetings and can articulate their beliefs, and that is encouraged. But I don't like any of our board members voting with a group on a position, outside of this body, because we are the sovereign. Everyone else is essentially, yes, less important than we are.
Just to make sure everyone gets a chance, I don't think, Board Member Reby, did you speak to this? No, okay. And then I think we'll be going. Okay. Board Member Reby.
I agree with Joel that if we are sending a board member, as a board member, they should only be voting on what we have established as a body. I do find value in us going to this meeting, being a part of it, and being seen as a part of a collaborative effort to push education forward and make it the best it can be. But I have to echo my concerns. If we send somebody as a voting member, they can only vote when we have established as a board what our policies are, and they cannot, whoever it may be, if we decide to go that way, they cannot vote their opinion. They need to vote as the board opinion.
Board Member Cannon.
Well, I agree with my colleagues that we don't want to send a random board member and have them voting their own conscience. So the way things worked, at least back in the day, was that we have legislative meetings as a board, and in those legislative meetings, we would take positions. And our representative on the Public Education Coalition could let those others know what the board voted position was, but never, ever would you vote independently or differently from what that board voted position was. But the lovely thing was you could go through, and I remember tracking sheets that show what all the different education organizations were, and their organizations had taken positions on things, and it gives us an opportunity to see where they are favoring things, where they aren't favoring things, and find out why. And I think it's great for us to at least contribute what our positions are and let our board stance on different education issues be known.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
So I'm kind of coming late to the conversation. I'm sorry, but I can kind of guess what we're talking about here. I have gone to that meeting a couple of times. Board leadership asked me to go a couple of times last year. Maybe it was the year before. Anyway, I've been there a couple of times. And my experience is that it's just information. I never voted for the board. I just gave information, kind of gathered information for the board and gave them maybe a different perspective. The board's, kind of a perspective from a board point of view, but not voted for. I think it's valuable for those things, but I think that, yeah, the voting part is probably problematic.
Any other comments? I think I, as the chair, would like to weigh in on this. I'm in support because when you look at the people at the table, they're all strong advocates of public education, and it's a really healthy environment to network. Many of us and many in certain assignments represent us in a voting capacity. When I was on STEM, I was on the STEM board. I was a voting member representing on the STEM side, and leadership trusted my judgment, and the board members trusted my judgment in serving on that board. Coming to this, I think there'll be plenty of time, and whoever we select to serve on this, those guardrails will be up, and they'd be really careful to make sure that the board is behind these issues as things are moving forward. And again, they do meet monthly, and so there is an opportunity to get to gather a position from the board on certain issues. And so usually I don't speak a lot towards something, but this is a real important group and a good opportunity to participate more than just being a guest. So I'm in support. Is there any other? I'm speaking to support. Board Member Wright.
I can vote in favor of this as long as I'm made comfortable that they won't use state school board endorsement, either way, voting yes or no. Will that board member be voting, Chair Huntsman, I guess is what I'm saying. If we send someone there.
Very, very, I
Will
don't
they be
think,
voting?
they don't get to, if,
If the board had a position on something, you could report that.
yeah, I don't see them, and let's go back to superintendent's comments. They're not an actively voting, lobbying group. It's more of a collaboration, but if they did need to get united behind something, it's all in or not, which would bring to, come back to this board to take a position so that member can take that back to the thing, but they're not an active, it's not like they're voting every month.
Hey, if we vote for it and that is put in there as a condition, you'll get my vote. If not, then I'll vote against it.
Well, by statute, I think it's by statute, you can't represent, I don't think you can represent, or you can, because you're a representative, but you can't represent the the board unless the board takes a position, period. And that's how we are.
When I was appointed to USBA board 2.5 years ago by then Chair Crandall, the previous person who had served there like 12 years on the USBA board voted with the USBA on all their issues and basically said that he was representing the state school board. And so it had been synonymous with the USBA for 12 years. And so the previous iteration, which you and I were part of, we broke that up. And it was controversial and some people were mad. I think it was healthy. And so I'm just worried about an entanglement similar going back to that approach here. And if you can make me comfortable, it's not going to happen, then I can be comfortable. Because of that history, I am leery.
And I think we all should be leery in any capacity that we have representing the board. And so in every case, you refrain from voting. Whoever we put on that committee, most likely would be instructed, don't vote on anything unless the board takes a position. Okay, let's just say they do. Then what do? We change out that position, but it's not an aggressive voting position, but I'm sure that they do occasionally want to take a position. Would you agree with that, Superintendent? I don't want to misrepresent it because I just know a little bit about them over the last 2 years.
You know, in the past, we've had board members come for a time. Members of leadership used to always attend. Now it's usually Angie, myself, Scott, sometimes a combination. And it's rare that a vote is taken. If it is, if we were to be members and prior to taking out our membership, we would say what we always say, and that is either the board hasn't taken a position on this or we need to check back with the board to get a board position on this before weighing in. Because we're there on behalf of the board, as any board member would be on behalf of the board.
Elisa's trying to call in, and she's trying to be heard. Oh,
Sorry, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've been trying to talk and I just hung up to recall, so I asked Michelle to tell you not to vote until I could say something.
Okay, would you like to say something?
Yes, if that's okay, Chair.
All right.
So this is the Utah Public Education Coalition that you're speaking. And I've been in and out of service, so I just want to make sure I'm not talking about something you're not talking about any longer.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so my concern is when I think of a coalition is a group of different voices coming together. And while you have different organizations, they all have the same thought. And one of the comments made by one of the board members at the beginning of this conversation is that this is all the entities involved in public education. And I would strongly disagree with that because there are a lot of voices that are not part of this public ed coalition. And my concern is that we create an echo chamber where we sit in a room and we hear all these people that think similar, and it diminishes the voices of people that have a different voice or a different concern, and even other entities that have a great deal of concern about issues related to public ed but aren't necessarily fitting the mold of a public ed coalition. If it were a true coalition, I think it would be representative by different voices and not just voices that are all similar. And so I disagree with the concept of having consent, how beautiful it is to have consensus. I disagree with that because I think there's beauty in diversity of thought. And so I'm concerned about being a voting member on this because all the arguments that I've heard are that we want a voice at the table, a seat at the table. Well, we've had, and the superintendent can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is even though we were not in this public ed coalition, we were still having representatives there at every meeting, and they weren't voting. And so to say that we now need to somehow be voting but not really voting because we want to make sure that board members are only voting on things that the board votes, well, we were already doing that. We already had someone there sitting at the table putting in input, and so I don't think it's necessary to be a voting member of something that we have concerns about the way the voting would go.
Okay, you had a
Thank you.
question. You had a question for the superintendent in there to weigh in on. You said
No, I just
superintendent
said
weigh in on this.
if I said it wrong that they hadn't been attending, that she could correct me. But my understanding is that we have had people at the meeting for the last couple of years.
That's correct. We've always had somebody there at the meeting, or I should say 99% of the time. I also might add that we've often had points of view of disagreement, both as board members and even members of the coalition will often disagree, and we have good, generous conversation.
Right, thank you. But I know that there's other entities that are not represented there, that have a differing viewpoint than what is traditionally coming out of these organizations that are sitting on this coalition.
Well, and we've got some other board members that want to speak, but those other entities, if they're an entity and want to be a part of this group, why don't they try to be a part of the group? That's kind of my.
Well, what the superintendent sent us was a list of requirements for being a part of it, and a lot of it were belief systems. And so if you don't fit that mold, then you can't be part of a coalition, and I don't think that that's.
I don't.
Maybe you better clarify.
Do you want to speak to that? And then we.
Board Member Ellis, what did you indicate that I sent you? I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
Sorry. Well, because I am driving, I had my son just forward an email, and I apologize for forwarding an email from board leadership. I just have not had time to sit down, and I just wanted to make sure that my thoughts were shared without. Anyway, so when you sent an original request to board leadership, you sent some terms for the coalition and things that they would like for voting members, and there was a list of beliefs.
Okay.
And I'm not saying yay or nay that I believe or disagree with the beliefs, but it is a list of beliefs that would prevent alternative viewpoints from being a part of this.
Okay. Thank you. Now I know of which you speak, an email that I sent to board leadership. Thanks.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
My experience, again, from watching that coalition for 25 plus years was that they was a public meeting. Talk about transparency in action. They did what they said, didn't just pretend to be transparent, but they invited anybody to come to that meeting. They had charter school representatives sometimes. They had random people who asked to attend. They never turned anyone away. It was a very inclusive meeting for anyone who wanted to be there. So I really don't agree that it was exclusive or that people and if someone wanted to speak, that person could speak and add to the conversation. So I really don't like it characterized as an exclusive group. It was not, though there have been members in the past, and I do support that membership, but I also very much agree with the inclusive nature of it. And if that were to change, I would not be speaking so positively.
Board Member Reeby. Board Member Reeby.
Thank you. Our education system and these processes that we're a part of work on a majority vote. We work and we listen to all the people. We try to move forward with majority of the people agreeing. What I'm hearing is sometimes that the minority feels like they're not being heard. The minority is being heard. We are trying to include the minority voice in these discussions, and we're trying to include them in these decisions, and we're trying to make sure that their positions are validated and understood. But our education system and this board works on a majority. So that's why we vote for things. That's how we move forward on voting for things. When we don't win, doesn't mean that you weren't heard. It just means that we took that into consideration, but we're moving the majority forward. So I think that that's part of this process as well. These coalitions come together and they try to represent a majority of people, and they are inclusive of minorities, and we try to hear the minority voice, and we try to make sure that we can maybe incorporate that voice into what the majority wants to move forward with.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
I have to vehemently disagree with Board Member Reeby. My voice, my side of the argument or of the discussion has not been represented as clearly in the past as one would claim. That's why we are seeing uprising. That's why we're seeing, grassroots become more vocal. And I think because people have been largely ignored for great amounts of period, and and the majority of the programs are based for, the poor and those that don't have a voice, right? But it's the conservatives, it's the constitutional side that is not being heard, that is being squashed. It's the religious side, it's the families, the family coalitions that are being squashed, that nobody wants to hear anymore. And so we've got to be very careful when we say the minorities being heard, because not everybody is. And so that's why it's good to have discussions when we can talk about UPAC, when we talk about, we are excluding a large portion. The PTA doesn't represent every single parent out there. I'm not a member of the PTA, some are members of the PTO, right, in charter schools. So, not every organization is being represented on this board. And so I think we need to really be careful in saying that at the end of the day, we have that consensus, because we do not.
Okay. Okay, let me, not saying any other lights, let me go back to the motion that was made, and the motion, let me go back, let me find it back here again. The motion was that we participate in the Utah Public Education Coalition. That was a motion that we do, so we're basically signing up, the way that I take it. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Will the ayes raise their hand? 7. Motion fails. Is that what you've got? Okay. Any other discussion on Utah Public Education Coalition participation? Board members, Stokes.
And what I heard from Board Member Lear is that they're open and very inclusive. So it doesn't mean that we can't go. Individuals who want to go can't go. It's just they're not there as a board member. They're there as, a voting member. Yeah.
So we'll most likely still, the board is not in support of it. That is clear to join, but the superintendent can choose as an operational thing.
Or any board member can go to their meetings.
Yeah, anybody can go. Yeah. According to what we understand. Yeah. Okay.